All right. Thanks very much, Sophie. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
All right. Now, guys, I probably appear here as Tammy Tan. I am, in fact, not Tammy Tan. I am Peter Higgins. We've had a couple of little technical glitches, but hopefully everything goes as well as we hope from this point forward. This afternoon, I'm planning to talk to you about the research that my colleague, Kerry Barros, and I undertook as participants in this year's program. You'll see from the title that it relates to EAP reading and writing activities. Before I start, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge the wonderful support that we've all had from Anne Burns and from Sophie as well, by the way. Today, of course, she's been coordinating this and has helped us to get connected, which is great. Throughout the whole program, of course, she and the folk at English Australia have been enormously supportive, and obviously their partner, Cambridge Assessment English, as well. And we've also had lots of wise counsel and input from the other participants in this year's program, so that's very much appreciated as well. What I'd like to do is just cycle through the slides here. Beg your pardon, guys, we just... Okay, so a little bit about RMIT English Worldwide. We offer ELICOS entry to foundation studies and RMIT degree programs. We offer 10-week courses. We have 6 of these courses from elementary through to Advanced Plus. As I will go on to explain in a minute, the course that we conducted, Kerry and I, was slightly shorter than the 10 weeks for reasons that I'll explain in a moment. As I said, it normally would be a 10-week program, and the particular level that was of interest to us in our research was the Advanced Plus level. We call it Level 7 or Advanced Plus. It's the final program that we offer that delivers our students straight into university. So notionally 10 weeks, although we did it over 9. It requires an IELTS Level 6 entry or a successful completion of the previous REW Level 6. Our interest was particularly in regard to the reading and writing macro skill development and online delivery methodologies. The participants that we had in our program were principally from mainland China. We had a couple of students from Saudi Arabia and one from Brazil. They were all on pathways into engineering, science and business. These are core programs that are offered by RMIT. You'll see that they were all within the age range of 21 to 29 with an average age of 24. Amongst this cohort, most of the students had already completed an undergraduate degree somewhere else. So all bar 2 of these students, I think, were on a pathway into a master's program. All of the students bar 1 had actually come up from our Level 6, which meant that they were already familiar with the processes of working online, and in particular, they'd been exposed to our Canvas LMS. We had some focus questions. These questions really revolved around what would happen in an online classroom environment. Now, when we'd started out on this program, the grand plan had been to look at some blended learning methodologies which could be used to enhance the traditional approach. Now, of course, that all changed when we moved right away from any sort of form of traditional approach and went online very, very suddenly. So we wanted to know what methodologies work the best. We were obviously very keen to know how we could perhaps measure those skill development processes. Given that we'd had a rapid deployment, we also wanted to look at what types of difficulties the learners encountered that perhaps they hadn't in the traditional classroom. And we also wanted to focus a little bit on how best we could give feedback as well to the students. Now, just to explain the research cycle, sorry, we've got a little bit of a formatting error there, but that's not a problem, I hope. The research cycle that we looked at here was something that we had undertaken in the traditional classroom for quite some time, based around 2 opinion-style texts, the same topic, but of opposing viewpoints. And then we have 6 stages that basically make up the cycle, that start with some vocabulary, which is considered at the beginning, in the middle and at the end as well. Setting the context, Reading and annotating the two texts, which is a really important function here. And then that's coupled with some comprehension questions, which allow the students to demonstrate their understanding of the key ideas in the text. We have some discussion and analysis in groups, and then we move on to getting the students to write a critical response where they synthesize the ideas from the two articles in a summary, extract one or two of those ideas and critique them in some detail. And then it all closes out with some review and feedback from the teachers. Okay, so it's worth just pausing for a moment to talk about the traditional approach, because this offered us some sort of point of reference. So in the classroom, this cycle had been adopted over some years with our Level 7 course. Students would typically receive a printed copy of the text, keeping in mind that the classroom environment was really very much based around a printed course book that the students had. So they could annotate text inside the course book, or typically we would print them out for them on large A3 paper, or perhaps even put them on butcher's paper so that they could annotate them more effectively. We'd get them to discuss the ideas in small groups in the classroom. And when that was done, we would get them to write summaries and discussions of the text. We'd scaffold and get them to build their critical response. Typically that would be handwritten, and then the teacher would give written feedback as well. Some of the teachers had over time adopted an online version of the writing, had been using the Google Suite in particular, but not all teachers. So the typical method would have still been a handwritten critical response. Let's talk now just about the 3 cycles that we were able to do with our research. Now, the first cycle, which we conducted in week 2, involved a topic called Globish, which, if you like, is a simplified version of the English language. It's part of a unit where we're introducing students to the concept of language and why we study it and its importance. We attempted in this research cycle to stay as closely as we practically could to what had been the traditional approach. So the students had access to PDF texts through the online learning management system that we use. They were able to just work with those as they saw them on the screen and take notes in a notebook, or they could annotate copies that they'd printed out. We had comprehension question sets in LMS, and then we had a teacher-led discussion in a large group, which was intended to sort of scaffold the approach of discussion. Planning and writing was done in small groups and pairs, and then there was some peer and teacher feedback using a correction code. In the second cycle, in week 3, we had a new topic, and we moved across to editable digital text, which were provided to the students in a Microsoft Teams environment. We encouraged the students to make annotations inside the digital text. Now, annotating is one of these academic skills that we impress upon our students. They acknowledge that it's important, they recognise why it's important, but very often when it comes to the exam, they don't generally do what they said they were going to do. And you can often look at exam papers, for example, and see 1 or 2 pieces of text underlined, but otherwise very little attempt to extract the important information off the page. We use supplementary teacher-created exam-style question sets, and the reason we do that again is because over time, our course book, which is now has been adapted fully for online use, had questions which maybe didn't offer much parity with what the students might see in their exams. That's certainly something that's changed now, but we built up exam question sets over time, which allowed us to do that. The discussion groups became smaller, and the planning and the writing became something that was done individually. And again, we got the students to do this in the Microsoft Teams environment. And the teacher feedback was delivered directly back into the students' original digital submission. Now, in week 6, this was the third and final cycle. We had a new topic, and you might look at that topic and wonder how we were lucky enough to pick something that had such resonance in this current climate. In fact, this is a topic that's quite old. We were in the process of considering retiring this topic because we thought it no longer had any relevance or importance. How wrong we perhaps were, and who would have guessed that it would be so topical. With these, again, we had digital editable texts. We encouraged the students to adopt some of the more advanced features of text annotation using the suite of tools that they were working with in Microsoft Word in particular. Again, more exam style question sets, and the focus now again very much on planning and writing individually. And with a view to the exam, we wanted students to be able to work under a little more time pressure and do things within a time constraint. In addition to the feedback that we gave them in the documents, I also created a recorded an audio file which I was able to give to them, where I walked them through their submission and gave them the feedback that way. Okay, so common to all cycles, all of the usual things. We introduced vocabulary at the beginning. We considered collecting vocabulary throughout. We used tools such as Quizlet and Padlet to capture and retain information. We used other activities within the Canvas LMS as well. In terms of setting context for the topic, we had shorter informative reading texts that allow students to become a little more familiar with the topic before they read the opinion texts. And we also include topical lectures and YouTube videos and things like that, which allow us to really get the students familiar with and comfortable with the topic before they're confronted with the opinion texts. Now, how do we collect the data? Well, there were three things that we did. We did a survey after cycle 2, which was designed to look at the students' preferences. We did a similar survey after cycle 3, where students could confirm what they told us before, and we asked them a few additional questions. We also undertook a very thorough review of the digital reading and writing activities that they'd done in cycles 2 and 3, mainly in cycle 3. What we were looking for was, basically, did they do it? What did they do? How did they do it? And did they in fact go back and check what they had done and heed the comments of the teacher? So what did we learn from all of this? The first, what I'll go on to describe is we'll talk first about what we found in the first survey, then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the findings from looking more closely at their work, and then close out with what we learned from the second survey. So the students were invited to indicate their preferences for the activities that they undertook in cycles 1 and 2. And what they told us was that they really did enjoy and got engaged with things like Quizlet. And in particular, they were very interested in teacher-directed research for vocabulary acquisition. So that's where we'd put them into groups and send them away to research words and come back and report to the class, or alternatively, create or collect information and put it on a live Padlet wall, which we could then retain for future reference. They obviously preferred editable digital texts, and in particular, they seemed to embrace annotation. So finally, we found a way where students seemed keen and to embrace annotation and to do it thoroughly, and particularly with the use of colour. Possibly we had an overrepresentation of visual learners in this class, but they certainly enjoyed that experience. They did like to put embedded notes in, preferred to use that over comment fields and bubbles, but generally they were rather keen to really extract all that information from the text. They weren't particularly bothered one way or the other about how we conducted the discussions, but there were some technical issues that we encountered early on which might have influenced their view of that. They had a very strong preference to work independently where possible, not just on the writing activities, but on the reading and things as well. This was again largely due to the fact, I think, that it was quite difficult for them to maintain connection and engagement with other people in the class. And this is probably a common thing that we're seeing with online learning as we use it at the moment, and some of the things that we perhaps need to overcome. Okay, so let's go through a couple of the things very quickly that I observed when I went through in some detail and looked at the students' work. Now, all of their work had been created inside the Teams environment. Each student was assigned a private channel, which meant that anything that they did within that channel was only visible to them and to their teachers. So that gave them some confidence that they weren't being looked at from afar. Here's an example here of a student who embraced annotation very enthusiastically, with lots of use of colour, different colour to indicate different parts of the text or different meanings, ideas, new vocabulary, perhaps discourse markers. They used different forms of underlining, and they also used comments over on the side of the screen as well, which was really good to see. Not all students used all of these methods, but many of them did, and they did it repeatedly without prompting, which was really great. We noticed that students tended to be quite compliant. They were compliant with things that we gave them in a Word format in Teams to do, less compliant with the Canvas LMS activities where the content capture was a little bit more visible to them. I guess what they were concerned about with Canvas perhaps was that when they made a mistake, it was obvious, it was there for their teacher to see. And they were probably just a little reluctant to do that. They much preferred to have a look at the questions and answer them in their own private channels. So that was something that we observed as well. Okay. Oops. Okay, so the next thing that I observed, and this is really kind of important, I think, this was the big takeaway for me in particular, is that there is so much detail and timeline information and metadata information contained within their submissions that not only can I see what they've done, but I can see how they've done it. I can see the order in which they've done it, and I can see how long it's taken them to get from one stage to the other. So in this particular example, the point that I'm trying to make with this screen capture is that we can see the student has made an attempt to extract information from a previous critical response that they've done. They've chosen key reporting language, and they've kind of copied it and pasted it in to scaffold their response to this particular pair of texts. I saw examples of where students had copied an entire critical response across as the basis for starting a new one and basically rebuilding from what they had. So this gave me a really good insight into how the students go about solving the problem. Okay, what we also learned is that while students appreciate the feedback that we give them, they generally don't revisit it and amend their work. I mean, here's a couple of very simple examples of things that I'd spotted, and I had hoped that the student would go back and at least acknowledge these errors, minor errors albeit, by fixing them up. But they didn't, and that was the norm. There were one or two students who genuinely went back and edited their submissions, but most of them did not. When we went to survey 2, the students were invited again to reconfirm some of their preferences, and they did. They told us a few other things as well. They told us that at the start of the course they had a higher confidence in reading than in writing, but on reflection at the end, they actually found reading and writing less challenging than the other skills, and probably a little bit better than they'd expected it to be, albeit they'd had some experience with this before, many of them as well. They certainly expressed preferences for working in a digital environment with editable reading text. That was very obvious. And most particularly, they demonstrated to me and indicated in their surveys that they really did embrace annotation, recognised that it was much more fun than it used to be, and I think gained a great deal of benefit from being able to explore lots of different options for doing it. They indicated again that they really do respond to all forms of teacher feedback. They respond favourably to getting it. They don't necessarily respond further to it. They expect it. They like it to be given promptly, and I do believe that they appreciate it, but they don't often go back and make a great deal of change to what they had previously done. All right, so just to close out, as we must be getting pretty close to time, if not there, sorry, Sophie. Just a couple of conclusions based on the focus questions that I had at the beginning. Obviously, interactive group activities where content is preserved and can be revisited at a later time for revision was widely received and well received. These appear to be a good approach to the online classroom. Editable course texts are going to be well received as well. Group activities are recognised as being important, but students indicated a preference to work alone. And this had a lot, I believe, to do with the fact that we had connection problems throughout our course, students dropping in and dropping out, technical problems, some of which were within our control and have subsequently been fixed, but many were not. Setting up a class team with private channels offers both a collaborative environment that we can work within, but it also gives the students a private area in which they can go and work and share what they've done only with their teachers. But of course, that also provides them with an ability to build a folio of their work, which again they can go back and revisit. Skill development measurement, well, there's lots of ways that we can do it. We can do it now in an online fashion that's captured. The information is captured and retained securely. Students can come back and revisit it. That's really very important to them. In an online environment, obviously, teachers are able to observe the completion of activities in real time. And obviously, as I indicated before, the big takeaway for me at least was that the metadata within digital submissions really does give us a great insight. We can have a look and see not just what they've done, but the process that they've gone through to arrive at the finished product. We also understand that Canvas LMS can capture and grade activities for later reference. Students are somewhat reluctant often to complete activities as they have been directed in these platforms. Just a couple of last little things. The learner difficulties, they're all the obvious ones that I'm sure that anybody out there who's listening today who's teaching online has experienced. We should never assume that our students are going to be familiar and comfortable with digital platforms. And don't set your expectations too high in regard to their IT aptitude either, by the way, because you'll only be disappointed if you do that. We have to really understand that some students really do struggle with some of the concepts, and from a distance and with limited language skills in some cases, although that wasn't the case in this class, that can be a bit of a problem. There's a reluctance to engage sometimes with the platforms, as we've said before, where results are captured and retained. And there were numerous limitations with connectivity that particularly impacted our ability to conduct discussion groups in our class. When you've got a small group of 3 or 4 people trying to discuss a topic, it's really, really very difficult when they're dropping in and dropping out all the time. Okay, I just think I have one more slide and then that's it. We're over to questions. So giving feedback, the age-old problem. You can give as much as you like and it's expected that you will do so, and there's not necessarily a preferred method for that, but getting students to respond to that feedback remains the biggest challenge. All right, well, that's, I think, probably about it for me. Sophie, thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Peter. So there's a question that's already come through. If anyone else has any questions for Peter, please pop them in the Q&A section. So this person would like to know if you developed the lecture or videos yourself, or did you source these online?
The lectures or videos. Well, if we're talking about the context setting supplementary material, we have a lot of that built into our course books. Mm-hmm. The informative texts come straight out of the course book. So for Globish, for example, prior to them reading the 2 opinion texts, there was an informative text. You know, what is Globish? It wasn't offering an opinion. It was just simply a summary of what it was. We have a bank of videos and things that we source through YouTube. They're not of our own making. Over the course of time, this is about a course that's been around for about 8 years. We've developed a rich resource of supplementary materials that dovetail beautifully with the content. So that's where we've got that material from.
Okay. Phil has a question. When students annotated the texts, how much paraphrasing went on? Do you think paraphrasing would be useful to introduce as an annotation technique?
Well, one of the reasons why we encourage students to annotate is not so much is so that they are then in a position to paraphrase. So they get the ideas often away from the page is the theory, and then when they come to describe what they've just read, they're not reliant on the text, and so they're therefore not inadvertently and subconsciously copying from it. We do teach paraphrasing, and we place a great deal of importance on it. I would say, in my experience as well, that it's a very complicated academic skill for students to master in the short time that we have them. At the best, we hope to get them thinking about the process of paraphrasing and developing that skill over time. You know, as I say to many of my students, paraphrasing is something that it's a skill that's learned, and there are many native speakers out there who wouldn't be able to do that very effectively. So we're asking a lot of students, but the annotations that we get them to put off the side are really just notes, you know, notes that prompt them to where the main ideas are in the text in particular, to allow them to go back and quickly find where the information is if they're asked to find it in a comprehension question, and just basically putting some order to the text. And again, I will say to the students, ask yourself how many times you want to read this text. The answer in all cases should be probably once in detail, and the more effective your annotations are, the more likely it is that you can read the text once and then thereafter only ever have to go back and find what you need by going straight to the scene of the crime, so to speak.
All right. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for the fascinating presentation. It's really great to be able to get inside, you know, the thoughts of the students, but also to see some of the back workings of what you can do with the metadata was fascinating as well. So thank you again to Paul as well, our other presenter for today, and thank you everybody for coming. Thanks again, Marcus from Cambridge and Anne Burns as well for taking part in today's presentation. And we look forward to seeing everyone at tomorrow's colloquium. Thank you.